Right now, if you're a filmmaker, you are not competing with your local area as so much you're competing with a global one. As we speak, one of the largest hits on Netflix is a cartoon called K-Pop Demon Hunters, which I watched it the other night, and it kind of reminds me of like Gem meets Boy Band meets Ghostbusters. The fact that K-pop is the primary driver just tells you that everything is expanding on a global scale, and I think we need to not only lean into that, but start embracing how to speak the language of somebody else. I think the way forward is being able to communicate cross-culturally, cross-languages in order to have the impact that we want. I grew up in a household where multiple languages weren't spoken, but were recognized. My father's side of the family is from Latvia, and my mom actually wanted me to learn Latvian. My dad's response was, what in the world is he ever going to use Latvian for? Which, you know, considering how things are going politically in America, maybe I should learn Latvian. Who knows? But going over to see my grandmother, hearing the Latvian language, learning a couple of words, and actually seeing my father and his mother sit down to have conversations got me used to the idea of being in a space where I heard something different other than English. I heard how people communicate differently, and also I got to read body language. I didn't understand what they were saying, but I would just listen for, I can't really say his name because we have the same name. So I would listen to when he would say our name, but would kind of like motion towards me. So I kind of picked these things up. And these were little subtle cues where I could read body language and see when somebody was angry, sad, passionate. I could kind of infer what was happening. While I didn't learn Latvian, it gave me an affinity for seeking out different cultures, different languages to see how did people think and react and talk. And when I was in, I believe, either kindergarten or the first grade, I heard Spanish for the first time. I remember I was like running down the hallway and I heard somebody speaking a language, and it was fascinating to me. I turned and I asked my mom, like, what language is he speaking? And she said, oh, that's Spanish. And then she asked me, do you want to learn? And I was like, yeah. So my mom walks up to this stranger and asks, I heard you were speaking Spanish. Where are you from? And it turned out that this woman, her name is Judy, and she was from Venezuela, and she became my first Spanish teacher. I can't remember whether we spent Saturdays or whether it was like after school, but I spent like a couple of years just having her teach me Spanish. She was not a Spanish teacher, by the way. She was just a lady who worked at the school who happened to know Spanish. And my mom asked her, and I think they like paid her a little bit extra to teach me Spanish. My parents became friends with them. We ended up visiting Venezuela. I visited Caracas. It was my first trip overseas. This was like the early 80s. So if you wanted to go someplace and you wanted to know what to do and where to stay, you had to either know somebody who went there, you had to go to the library, and you had to communicate with like a travel agency. So you would pick up the phone, dial some agency that would give you recommendations of where to stay.
That's why Uniglobe is the largest travel agency franchise network in all the world.
And it was a whole like ordeal. I remember we had like flown for hours, and we land in, we get in there, and we open the door. There's these giant bugs in the wall. And my mom's like, nope, we're not staying here. And then he had to like talk to the people downstairs and try to get his money back when they try to say you can't get your money back. And it's like, well, we're not staying here because it's copyright. It was a whole ordeal, but we ended up getting into a new hotel. We had to find a guide, so we found this taxi who we ended up like paying to take us around for the entire trip. We visited Judy and her family. She was married to an American journalist. and they decided to move back to Venezuela to be closer to her family. I don't know what has happened to them. Judy, if you're watching this video, hope you're well. Hope you and your family are okay. We took this taxi and we went on like this mountain hiking trip. I remember we went horseback riding along the mountains, which was a little frightening, but also fascinating. And we went to this town square where people were taking ice and like fresh fruit and crushing it up in a blender, and they like sold it to us. And I remember it was delicious. It opened my eyes to not only different cultures and countries, but just also made me really want to learn Spanish even more. I continued learning Spanish into around the 5th or 6th grade. Then I dabbled in other languages. I learned a little bit of Italian, a little bit of French. Moved overseas to Denmark when I was 13, and I just had to focus completely on Danish, and Spanish was not an option for me to learn. So I had to pick between French and German. I took French, which was kind of helpful, but secretly I wish I'd also learned German, because I have met so many Germans, surprisingly, since I've been here in Los Angeles, which is weird. My Spanish has kind of like atrophied, but I've always tried to stay connected to the language and the culture. When I found myself thinking of the first films that I wanted to do, they were all around or featured the language of Spanish. I tried to make a film called Fair Trade, which, yes, I know fair trade is like the way that you make coffee. We tried to change the title, but we just kept it. We ended up only shooting a scene of it, but it was around the topic of immigration, the topic that's close to me, because not only do I come from a lineage of immigrants with my dad, I was an immigrant living in Denmark. And here's the thing that people don't understand about being an immigrant. It's not just like learning the language or learning the culture. When you learn a new language, you are learning a new way to think. Language is just a communication method for getting your thoughts out. So if you express yourself in English, you mostly say, I want to do this. So you start with I, and then the action you want to take, and then the rest of it. Whereas a language like, let's take Japanese, you don't ever say I. You always say the action, and then you address the other person. So the other person becomes more important than you do, which, is not exactly how it works culturally, but there is an emphasis in the language on certain things. And in Spanish, there's emphasis on formality. There's, tú and usted. There's a lot of different ways that you say words from the past, the present, to the future. It's a completely different way of thinking. And a lot of times you will also not say I. People will assume that you are talking about yourself depending upon the tense of the word that you use. And this has shaped the way that I view things. I tend to, because I learned Spanish at such a young age, I think I tend to address the other person first versus thinking about myself in a conversation, which is helpful and sometimes not, because you have to also know how to talk about yourself. Having that affinity for Spanish and language and knowing what it's like to be an immigrant and having to learn a new language and a new way of thinking and how to survive in a new place, and also wondering am I going to get deported? Am I doing the right thing? Am I contributing? Am I not contributing? How do the people view me? That has made me have an affinity for languages and also stories around the Spanish language.
Nos sirve, ¿verdad? Fíjese que he estado experimentando y leyendo sobre la sal. Y tiene un montón de minerales, quizás nos puede ayudar.
Beatriz, ¿qué sabes de eso? Dios nos acompaña siempre. Tenemos que tener fe que todo saldrá bien.
I made another film called Sprout, which was entirely in Spanish. Now, my Spanish is okay, but I was able to lean on knowing how to look at people and situations and read body language and know if the emotion was right and how they were delivering the words. That helped me deliver a film that started at the Cleveland International Film Festival. It got distribution. It was aired on PBS. It took me a very, very long way. And then I keep coming back to these stories that surround the Spanish language. I produced another film, Gabriela, which was sponsored in part by Netflix. That was also halfway in Spanish, and we had a lot of Indigenous aspects to that, which again, I don't speak the Indigenous language, but being a producer and working with a director, you're able to see, okay, what is the emotion that's being delivered through these words? I may not understand the words, but I can read the emotion. And now here I am about to head to Miami for the premiere of another film called 15, which is mostly in English, but is around Spanish and Indigenous themes and experiences. And looking at this pattern that I'm seeing through my life, I'm noticing that the language of Spanish is a constant presence. So that tells me, one, I should learn Spanish again. I should finally take Spanish seriously and start trying to learn it. And two, just leaning into more international themes and stories is going to be important, not just for me, but I think for filmmakers in general. The local infrastructure of Hollywood here in America, that's the powerhouse, that's the main entertainment industry vehicle, is kind of crumbling and becoming more insular. They're operating off of an old model, which is fine stars and predictable stories and profit. And they're not really seeing any profit. And there aren't a lot of movies being made by people who are not either rich or old or mostly white, for the most part. There's still stuff being made, but as far as the big tentpole pictures, it's only a few people and there's no development coming. So with Hollywood still figuring out what it wants to do, I think this is an opportunity not only for us filmmakers to make our own stories locally, but I think we should start reaching out to people outside of our own country. We now have this wonderful thing called the internet and social media where we can connect with anyone across the globe. And I think the way that our voices get through as to what we are actually experiencing here in the United States, make it a conversation with people abroad. Try to be representatives for those stories. Have it be a cross-cultural collaboration where you are working with a company that's overseas, so you bring your perspective and they bring their perspective and you tell a joint story. When we made Gabriela, we collaborated with a company that was in Guatemala. So they brought their Guatemalan experience. They also brought an actress, Maria Telon, to come shoot with us, and we brought the American story. So it was an American story, but it has international legs. I know there's a lot of consternation about telling stories that it might rub some people the wrong way, but also it's not entirely authentic because you don't exactly know a lot about that culture unless you live there. But if you communicate with a company that does live over there, or an actor, or maybe another director or producer, you can tell a story where maybe somebody who's from your part of the world goes over to that part of the world, tell stories that are the merging of those two cultures, or those two cultures experience each other, which is what I'm always fascinated with, and it's why, honestly, I started the Blended Future Project to begin with. It is both local, hyper-local, so what is your immediate area and who the people that you know, but also how can you reach across your national border and work with somebody, say, in France or Senegal or Japan? How can you make those collaborations happen? And that way you both can start building an audience in places that you wouldn't normally think of. There's a great filmmaker called Noor Niaz. I'm probably butchering his name. He lives in Vietnam. I think he lives in Vietnam right now. Pretty sure he lives in Vietnam. He talked about the fact that he and other filmmakers from that part of the world are coming here to the United States to show their movies, and they are meeting people from all over the world. And as a matter of fact, his team in Vietnam is composed of people who some live in France, some are come from Germany, and I think that's the way that the industry is shifting. Embracing that global initiative is how, even if the giant machine that is Hollywood is coming down upon our shoulders and not opening the door as much as they used to, there are other doors that we can go through. I hope that helps. I hope that gives people some instructions on how we can all move forwards. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.